I'm bored. It's early, so I'm gonna read some r/entitled parents. This one's by Shy Girl Turned Sassy. Back with another story about my aunt and her shameless entitlement. The events of the story occurred in 1982, a year before I was born. My dad told me all about it some time ago. My parents had recently gotten married. My cousin, aunt's son, was 6 at the time, and my uncle had recently lost his job. My grandmother insisted that my dad support his sister in her time of need. This meant letting my aunt and cousin move in until my uncle could find a job. Uncle, too, of course, would be welcome whenever he decided to show up. My parents' house had only 2 bedrooms. One was occupied by Grand Monster. The other by my parents. Here in India, it is customary for elderly parents to live with their adult sons. She insisted that my parents give up their bedroom to aunt and cousin because she couldn't imagine her little girl having to sleep in the living room. My dad didn't want to upset his mother, and he agreed.
No, don't like that.
My aunt and cousin stayed for over a month, and my uncle too would come over on the weekends. Grand Monster insisted that mother cook for them whatever they demanded, so my mom would come home from work and would cook 3 different meals, one in accordance with my cousin, one according to my aunt's preference, and a third for herself, my dad, and Grand Monster. On weekends, when my uncle came over, his preference would have to be catered to as well. But were they ever grateful? Hell no. They felt perfectly entitled to boss my mom around and find faults in her efforts to make them comfortable. Nothing she ever did for them was good enough. Aunt and Grand Monster would constantly criticize her cooking and housekeeping skills. When my dad did his share of housework, they'd mock him for being henpecked. Okay, but did they ever help out with housekeeping, or? Almost every other day, my aunt would invite her friends over, and they'd stay for hours, and my mom would have to cook refreshments for them as well. Anytime my mom wanted to invite her friends over, my Grand Monster would put on a scowl that could suck the soul off a Dementor. Why do I keep saying aunt? Aunt. That is how I've always said aunt. Oh my god. But aunt's friends were welcome, of course. The one time my dad put his foot down was when aunt wanted to invite a friend of hers to stay for the weekend. Interestingly, my uncle's sister, i.e. aunt's sister-in-law, found aunt and uncle's behavior to be quite inappropriate. She visited once and clearly didn't like the way my mother was being treated. She was a strong, no-nonsense kind of woman and called out my aunt for not being grateful for the way my mom and dad were putting up with her, and told her she should stop being a burden and should help out with the housework. My dad tells me that the concern an outsider had shown for her well-being that should have been expected from family members brought tears to my mom's eyes. My aunt cried over this too, but for entirely different reasons. She bitched to my Grand Monster that my parents had made her look bad in front of her husband's sister. My Grand Monster reprimanded my parents for making her cry, and my mom ended up apologizing to my aunt to keep the peace. I'm sorry, what? She did what now? What the? Who? It turns my stomach when I think about this. Finally, my uncle found a new source of income, and aunt and cousin moved back in with him. But not before they took my parents' TV with them? Oh my god. That's theft, bro.
Theft is not a joke, Jim.
Back then, televisions were a novelty for middle-class households in India. My aunt and uncle didn't have one. My mom and dad had just bought theirs. My Grand Monster made my parents give up their television to my aunt because they'd been through such a rough time, and they'd give it back once they could afford to buy their own. Bro. Needless to say, the TV was never returned. Well, that made me slightly angry.